And good morning. Chris Doering, kind enough to join us earlier, so we'll have a little more time, which I'm excited about. We get to catch up with him a couple of times a year. And this is the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Your SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue, the official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show. You can watch the show right now on YouTube. Search Out of Bounds Sports. And Chris Doering with the SEC Network, All-American wide receiver at Florida, a decade in the NFL. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. CD, good morning. How are you, bud?
Good morning, man. It's been a minute. How you doing?
It has been a while, and I'm fired up that you're back with us. You know, we were talking about Florida, and Blake, my producer, is 31. So he didn't grow up. I started Mississippi State 92, and by then y'all were the high-flying act of the SEC, and y'all owned the SEC in the 90s, and y'all were doing stuff that had never been done before. So it was really cool to see what was going on, and you got to be a part of that, and at a cool position too, where most college teams were not using that position. As you know, they were still, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. It caught Pat Dye and Dooley and Fulmer and all those dudes off guard. So, and then y'all become a power. You win 3 national championships, so on. What can you put your finger on? Because, look, CD, I think you've had 2 guys go through that they may not be great, but I still think they're legit, that look like they had it rolling and imploded but right before our eyes, and McElwain and Mullen. And the last, post-Urban. And so, and I got to see what Mullen did here, and it's tough to win in this state at State or Ole Miss. So if you had to put your finger on it as a former player who's really, really close to the deal, why haven't they been able to get this thing right in Gainesville?
Well, one, I want to go back. It's funny you talked about those early years at Florida. I was literally talking about it last night with one of my buddies about what a cool experience it was. I didn't get to Florida until 91, but 90 was Coach Spurrier's debut, and I remember vividly that Oklahoma State game where he just comes out with Shane Matthews throwing the ball all over the yard, putting 50-plus up, and that was the tone setter for the rest of the 12 years that Coach Spurrier would be there. And a lot of what you see in offensive football today, not only in college but in the NFL, was being done by Coach Spurrier before anybody else was doing it. 4 or 5 wide receivers, spreading the ball, throwing it vertically, emphasis on the passing game. So I just feel so grateful to have been a part of such a revolutionary time here, not only at the University of Florida and the SEC, but in the landscape of college football in general. And so, I think there's part of it is what the expectation level is, right? I mean, your expectation for Florida is much different than probably your producers or people that are maybe haven't necessarily seen some of those glory years of the 90s and what Coach Spurrier did. I think one of the biggest things is that there's a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids that don't look at Florida the same way that you and I looked at Florida or Florida State or Miami for that matter. Coming out of this state, it used to be a big deal to go to one of the big 3. It's not that way anymore. I mean, Alabama comes in, gets the pick of the litter. Clemson comes in, gets whoever they want. Georgia, LSU. I mean, there are a lot of different big-time college football programs that come in and mine some of the best players. So until you're able to start keeping some of those guys at home, it's going to be tough to regain the status of where Florida was in the 90s and beyond. Secondly, I think it comes down to one simple thing. I don't think there's a more important position in all of sports than the quarterback.
Yep.
Like it or not, the quarterback is always going to get way more credit than they deserve and way more blame when things go poorly. But it literally is the most important position because of everything they're tasked to do, especially nowadays with the run game involved, quarterback run game, and how that's changed football. So Florida just hadn't hit, man. When Tebow left after 2009, Florida walked through a desert of quarterbacks and couldn't find the right one. And in some cases, the right one was probably on the roster. Look at how long Jacoby Brissett's been in the NFL, or even Jeff Driscoll, how long he had a chance. I mean, those guys didn't get developed. So it's not only recruiting the right guy, but developing them and putting them in a position to be successful. You go back and look at, for those that are listening that are Ole Miss fans, remember Florida had pretty good one that ended up getting suspended right after the Ole Miss game a few years back, and ultimately landed in at West Virginia.
Yeah.
And I'm going blank.
Will Greer.
Will Greer, yeah. The quarterback position has just kept Florida from being able to get to where they need to get, where they have been in the past. And even the one good quarterback that Florida had, and Kyle Trask, was on the bench and only got in there because of some luck, with I hate to say luck, but Felipe Franks getting injured and found his way on the field and ended up taking Florida to the SEC championship. But that was it, man.
And that's where it gets weird. Chris Doering, SEC Network, or hard to, I think, explain, is that even though y'all been out in no man's land since 2009, you've still been in Atlanta several times. You played in New Year's Day.
Not because of Florida's success. Now, let's be honest. Those 2 years that Florida went under McElwain were, largely because the East was really down.
Yeah.
I do think, Florida, year with Trask, and they went a couple years back, 2020, it was a weird season, right? That was the pandemic-affected year, and Florida played Alabama really well in that game. But I would say a lot of the success that Florida had before that was probably more about the lack of real talent in the East as opposed to Florida being an elite team in the same class as the top teams in the West.
Okay, so McElwain and Mullen, McElwain seems to be a good guy, and then Mullen, Dan may not be a great guy, but he's a hell of a football coach, and so those things for a second there look like they're rolling the right way. I just wonder if the shadow of Spurrier and Urban is so much that it trips you up at some point, or is that nonsense? I'm going down the wrong road. Where am I going here, CD?
I think there's some of it. I think nobody wanted the job after Coach Spurrier left because of how big those shoes were to fill. Coach Spurrier left after 12 years, and one of the things he said on the way out the door was, it got to a point where the feeling of the wins could never offset the disappointment of the losses. The expectation was too high. Not only did you have to win, you had to win scoring 50 points a game with an offensive style of football that was fun and entertaining. Go back and look at Will Muschamp. I think in Will's, second year, they win, 10 or 11 games. They're like a play or two away from getting into the national championship game potentially. They end up going to the Sugar Bowl and lose to Louisville in that one. But it just wasn't pleasing to the fans because they were doing it with defense and they were close games and it wasn't entertaining. And I think you go back and look, you've had some coaches that are, pretty. I think Will Muschamp is a really, really good coach. I think he had some bad luck. I think Ron Zook had some really bad luck. Ron Zook, that team that Urban Meyer won the national championship with was largely recruited by Ron Zook. So I don't think people give him the credit that he deserves. But yeah, two legends in Coach Spurrier and Urban Meyer make it daunting to live up to what the expectation level is. And a lot of people will take the job because of, the money that's being offered and the not facilities. Facilities now are coming along, but because of what's at your fingertips in terms of things that you need to be successful. But just the overall pressure and expectation, there's idiots talking about Billy Napier being on the hot seat heading into the second year. What kind of alternate reality are we living in?
Yeah, you got to give somebody some time. Especially after you thought the first 2 or 3 years you had was Dan 3 or 4? Was the implosion in year 3 or 4?
I think it was in the fourth year. Wasn't it?
Okay, it was. And back-to-back New Year's Six bowl games. I'm pretty sure. And like you said, he played Bama well into the fourth quarter and then beat Harbaugh and embarrassed Harbaugh in Michigan, I think, in the Chick-fil-A Bowl or something. Yeah. So. I thought he did a remarkable job with Kyle Trask, and
you know this. Hey, you're a smart guy. You've been around him before. The guy you say what you want about him. Maybe say what you want about his work ethic as it relates to recruiting. The dude can draw up ball plays and dial up ball plays.
Yes.
He's a very offensive mind. And go back and look at that year that Florida went, or a couple of years there where they were having a lot of success. It was Kyle Trask, and then you look at Kyle Pitts, who was a generational type tight end, Kadarius Toney, who was an absolute freak. They had some really unique players. But I think, in going back to your question, one of the other things that Florida as it relates specifically to the recruiting, what happened to the days of having those lines of scrimmage that you're used to seeing? Florida had a history dating back even to like Trace Armstrong, Wilbur Marshall back in the 80s. I mean, you had dudes that were freakish style defensive line, outside linebackers, guys that could rush the passer, guys that could, penetrate in the run game up front. Florida hadn't had that in a long time. You looked at the teams comparatively at the top of the league and what Florida has looked like. They just haven't had the lines of scrimmage to be able to compete against the elite programs. And nowadays in college, it's not just about having those guys. It's having 2 and 3 waves of them. You have to have depth of talent,
right.
And there's not a whole lot of guys walking the planet Earth that are big enough, strong enough, agile enough to play the defensive line position the way it has to be played in the SEC. So if you miss out on some of those guys that are coming from your own state, man, it makes it tough to play catch-up.
Chris Doering with the SEC Network, All-American for the Gators, wide receiver in the 90s. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line talking about Florida football and if and when they'll be back. Okay, well, what is the conversation like down in Gainesville? Is it, I mean, you are a former star there, so I can't imagine how many people approach you, especially in the offseason. I know you're in Charlotte a good bit during the season. Is it almost a defeated approach? I mean, is it still hungry? What are the conversations like, CD?
It's a wide range of being out of touch with reality, of apathy, of overall anxiety. I'd say I was at this retirement party for a guy I know the other day, and got into a Florida football conversation, and that was like the day or two after I think the Vegas odds came out for over/under on Florida's win total. Florida's got the second least projected wins in the conference, just ahead of Vanderbilt at the 5.5 wins, and it is a very difficult schedule.
Good hell!
I don't think people realize the undertaking that Coach Napier was faced with. In terms of rebuilding the roster, last year was year zero, if we're being honest. I mean, you're going to see some improvement this year, I think, in terms of the roster and understanding scheme and, listening to Coach Napier during the spring talking about how much better he expects the offense to be. I don't know if that's true. I mean, you're losing a number 4 quarterback overall in the NFL draft, and that in and of itself was frustrating with the inconsistencies in production that you had offensively. And I agree, you had another year under the belt, but do you have the right guy at the quarterback position? They seem all in on Graham Mertz. Who knows how that plays out? But I think that Florida fans don't really realize this was a complete rebuild, a tear down to the studs and start over again. And I have guys talking to me, oh man, they're going to win. They're going to win 7 or 8 games this year. You look at that schedule. You tell me where 7 or 8 games comes from. You start the season on a Thursday night in Salt Lake City. You play LSU from the west. You play Arkansas from the west. What you got to play in Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky are in better positions than you are right now. Hell, you just lost to Vandy last year. You tell me where you even exceed the 5.5 win total that's been set by Vegas.
All right. I'm looking at the schedule, and you're right. And you don't, even though Napier got everybody excited and Anthony Richardson last year with the win over Utah and Whittingham, you're right, man. You don't.
It was the worst thing that could have happened for Florida.
It really was.
For Florida to come out and win that game the way they did, with Anthony Richardson looking like Superman, all of a sudden Florida vaults up to number 12 in the polls. And you're thinking, wow, here we go. It couldn't have set the bar any more unrealistically high than what it did, and I think that gave Florida fans some false hope and set them up for some disappointment. But with that being said, I mean, that's what's frustrating, because you look at what he was able to do in that game. Even in the loss against Tennessee, he was awesome. You were handcuffed some because of Jack Miller's injury in the preseason. Didn't really have a backup quarterback all year, so you're trying to protect Anthony Richardson and not put him in harm's way. But you didn't get the full usage out of what his capabilities are. I think you look at the things that happened last year, and there are some signs of real hope and growth. But I think what he was able to do, running the football and making plays, again, kind of overshadowed how deficient the talent was in a lot of places on that roster offensively.
Yeah, you got to go to LSU, at South Carolina, at Kentucky, and you mentioned at Utah. This isn't a good schedule for Napier in year two. Tell me about Graham Mertz. Is he a dual threat guy? Can he make it happen with his legs?
Yeah, he's a 5-star guy coming out of high school. I get the feeling that he's chasing this projection of who he was supposed to be coming out of high school. The guy has a tremendous debut at Wisconsin, has been chasing that success ever since, to the point where I think he puts a lot of pressure on himself. That's one of the things the coaches talked to me about, when I was getting ready for the spring game, was just, hey, we're asking him just to play within the offense here. And everybody raves about how intelligent he is. The command of the offense that he has comes in, early in spring and just dives into the playbook and constantly wants more. How this offense, is kind of tagged with a lot of different quarterback options to be able to get him to the right play. So utilizing a little bit of that football IQ more than maybe he was given the opportunity to at Wisconsin. A chance to. I honestly think if you go back and watch the spring game, the defense looked pretty good. I'm fired up about Austin Armstrong, the defensive coordinator that comes over from Southern Miss and Alabama most recently. But I think I believe in let me start over. I believe in Coach Napier. I think he's going to be successful. I think he's the right guy for the job. I just think there needs to be some patience. Now, with that being said, I think he's really good at being able to engineer a run game. I look no further than the jump they made from Mullen's last season to what they did last year running the football. So I think they'll be able to create some offense with the offensive line. They were missing 2 starters during the spring game. So those guys will be good. The running backs, that group is as deep as any running back group in the country. And so I think they'll play defense. I think they'll generate some run game. I think they'll be involved in a lot of close games. I just don't see Graham Mertz as the guy that's going to go out and put the team on his shoulders and carry you to victory throwing the football, 30 or 40 times a game. So maybe that's not who they're going to be. Maybe he's the perfect fit for what they want to be and just not making mistakes. If you're playing those defensive games, the close games, running the ball, you can't afford to turn the football over. You can't afford to not convert third and shorts. And so maybe he's the right guy to fit into what they want to be from a characteristic standpoint offensively.
All right, let's switch gears. CD, Chris Doering, you see him every week on the SEC network throughout football season. All-American at Florida under Spurrier. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. So let's start with Georgia. They were little brother once Spurrier came in, and y'all rolled for 20 years, and now this thing is flipped. How difficult has that been for Gator Nation?
It's an interesting dynamic in general because growing up a Gator fan myself in the 80s, Georgia owned Florida, and it was very disappointing every year to get your hopes up and get them dashed by Buck Belue to Lindsey Scott or Herschel Walker running for, carrying the team to 44-0 victory. Like, I remember these things vividly as a young fan. And then Coach Spurrier shows up in 1990 and said, hey, our number one goal is to beat Georgia. Like, everything that we want to accomplish on our goal list starts with beating Georgia, and he was right. I mean, that carried us to when the divisions got split up and winning the East and getting the SEC championship games and ultimately winning national titles. Like, that was the overall key. And to have that sort of dominance for 2 decades, in a way, Georgia regaining some of their success and beating Florida was the best thing that could have happened for the rivalry, because I think that the Florida-Georgia rivalry fell way down on the list of Florida rivals for Florida fans. It was Florida State, it was Tennessee, it was an LSU
sure.
After those Tebow years. But I think that is the number one game on the schedule now for Florida fans, as it should be. It's such a special rivalry to be a part of, and the setting there in Georgia. I know there's a lot of talk lately about moving it out of Jacksonville, but it's such a unique game that's different than every other. And I played in those, the 94, 95 games when they were redoing the stadium for the Jags, and played in Gainesville against them and played in Athens against them. So I understand it, but it felt like another SEC game. And in a college football landscape and an SEC that is changing as quickly as things are, I think it's important that you cling to some of the tradition that's made your conference so great, and that's one of them. So keeping the game there and having it front and center on Florida's schedule of games that the fans want to win is important. You hope that they can start to win a few more of them so it doesn't go the other way and the apathy doesn't set in there. But I do think that right now it seems like a chasm between where Georgia is, where everybody else is, and certainly where Georgia is and where Florida is right now.
Okay, so that game could move home and home. And I've been to the cocktail party. Obviously, I'd forgotten that you ended up playing in Athens and Gainesville because of NFL, I guess, stadium renovations, Jaguar stuff. If that happens, and if y'all drop Florida State, because let's say we go to the 3 permanent, 6 rotating, CD.
Well, hold on. What are you talking about, drop Florida State?
So let's just say... Let's say that it's not a mandated Power 5 game anymore from the conference. If we bump it up to 9 games, right? And we go 3 permanent and 6 rotating, I wonder if Florida State will continue, or if Strickland and the Florida Brass will look at it and say, "Hey, man, we just went from 8 conference games to 9 conference games. Let's get out of this thing." What are your thoughts?
No way that goes away. I mean, okay. I have a hard time believing that would happen. Then again, I had a hard time believing in the 80s that the Miami game would go away, and I think it's been bad for the state. I think it's important that you play your rivals within the state. That's such again, another rivalry that's kind of flipped here with Florida State seeming like they're moved ahead of Florida. So that's one that I think back on the headliner of the schedule for Florida fans. I think they're going to be really good this year with Jordan Travis returning for another season. So I do think that one stays around. The best thing that could be happening right now is the 12-game college football playoff expansion. That gives you the margin for error that you need to play more difficult schedules. I don't know if you're going to be in Destin. I'll be there in a couple of weeks, but I think we get the announcement about the 9-game schedule and the 3 permanent rivals. I don't know that we'll get the announcement on who those rivals are or what the schedule is going to look like, but I do think we'll get that 9-game announcement when we get to spring meetings in a couple of weeks. But I think I'm excited about what that means to put more meaningful games on the schedule. Let's get rid of these FCS games. I've talked before that those need to be spring games. Give them a chance to make some money in the spring. Make it a TV event. Make it something people want to come out to during the spring. But during the fall, let's play good competition, because not only is it great for the television contracts, these teams, they need to put people in the stadium not only because of selling tickets and booster fees, but like today's student is tomorrow's booster. If you're going to continue to support the program, you have to have engagement from the students that are in school right now. And I think that's one of the scary things about the prospects of the future, is just how disconnected so many students are at universities across the country.
We're going to leave it there. Chris Doering, CD, SEC Network, All-American at Florida, walking us through what's going on in Gainesville. And he's right. We should learn, what the 3 permanent and 6 rotation looks like now with Oklahoma and Texas coming in. Hope to see you down in Sandestin. Be good, CD. We appreciate you.
Thank you, bro.
Chris Doering, All-American at Florida, under Steve Spurrier, a decade in the NFL. Now you see him every weekend on the SEC Network with the crew. It is the best college football show on TV. Saturday throughout the day, but Saturday night, and then running it again on Sunday morning. Good morning. Welcome in. We are the Out of Bounds Show. We're brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be Blue, the official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show. If you missed that interview in a couple hours, it will be on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds. We would appreciate you hitting that subscribe button.